Have you ever felt that something in your life is quietly changing, even though nothing around you seems different? Maybe you've noticed that certain people are drifting away, certain conversations no longer excite you, certain dreams that once consumed your mind suddenly feel too small for who you're becoming. And perhaps deep inside, there's a strange feeling you can't explain, a feeling that something significant is approaching. Most people ignore these moments. They dismiss them as imagination. They distract themselves with noise. They continue chasing people who no longer value them, opportunities that no longer fulfill them, and versions of themselves they have already outgrown. But what if these moments aren't random? What if they're signs? Signs that you're entering a phase of life that will transform everything. A phase where the right people begin appearing at exactly the right time. A phase where old desires are replaced by deeper purpose. A phase where the energy you've spent chasing suddenly begins attracting. Because there is one truth few people realize. Before life elevates you, it separates you from everything that no longer belongs in your future. And that's where most people become afraid. They mistake transformation for loss. They mistake silence for loneliness. They mistake endings for failure. But what if every ending you've experienced recently was actually preparing you for the greatest beginning of your life? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear may explain experiences you've been having for months, or even years. And if these signs are appearing in your life right now, then you're much closer to a breakthrough than you think. The first sign is something that almost everyone misunderstands. You stop chasing. At first, it feels strange. For years, you may have believed that success required constant pursuit. Chase the relationship, chase approval, chase recognition, chase opportunities, chase validation. The world teaches us that if we stop chasing, we lose. But something remarkable happens during periods of deep psychological growth. You begin to realize that chasing often comes from fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough. And once you begin healing those fears, your behavior changes naturally. You stop forcing conversations. You stop begging people to understand your worth. You stop convincing others to stay, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that what is meant for you does not require constant pursuit. This is where life begins testing you. The moment you stop chasing, many people notice. Some become confused, some become curious, and some suddenly start moving toward you. Why? Because human psychology is deeply influenced by energy. When someone spends all their time seeking approval, others unconsciously sense dependence. But when that same person becomes centered, confident, and emotionally self-sufficient, their energy changes completely. Suddenly, the person who ignored them becomes interested. The friend who disappeared starts reaching out. The opportunity that felt impossible begins opening doors. And this leads us to one of the most fascinating realities about relationships. If two people are truly meant to reconnect, one thing almost always happens. Life creates distance first. That sounds contradictory, doesn't it? Most people assume that destiny means everything should happen smoothly. But psychological growth rarely works that way. Often, two people separate because they still have lessons to learn. They need experiences that force them to mature. They need challenges that reveal hidden wounds. They need time apart to become the versions of themselves capable of sustaining a deeper connection. This is why some relationships disappear only to return years later in a completely different form. The separation wasn't punishment, it was preparation, and during that preparation something important occurs. Both individuals are forced to confront themselves, their insecurities, their fears, their patterns, their emotional blind spots. Without this process, the relationship would simply repeat the same mistakes. But once genuine growth occurs, the connection evolves. Not because fate magically intervened, but because the people involved became different. This is also why you should never spend your life chasing someone who chooses to leave. If a connection is truly significant, growth will reveal that naturally. Force never creates destiny. Only transformation does. And here's where things become even more interesting. Many people who are about to enter the best chapter of their lives experience an unexpected period of isolation first. Not because they are failing, but because their identity is changing. Imagine a snake shedding its skin. For a brief period, the old skin becomes too tight, too restrictive, too uncomfortable. The same thing happens psychologically. The old version of you no longer fits. yet the new version has not fully emerged. This creates a strange emotional space. You feel disconnected from your past, but uncertain about your future. Friends may stop understanding you, your interests may change, your priorities may shift dramatically, and during this stage, many people panic. They assume something is wrong. In reality, something is finally going right, because every major transformation requires a temporary period of confusion. The caterpillar would look like a failure if judged halfway through becoming a butterfly, and many people judge themselves in exactly the same way. They focus on the uncertainty while ignoring the transformation taking place beneath the surface. What if the discomfort you're feeling isn't evidence of failure? What if it's evidence of growth? What if the confusion is actually proof that you're leaving an old reality behind? Think about it carefully. The most successful periods of life rarely begin with certainty. They begin with change, and change almost always feels uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. That's why the strongest people aren't those who avoid uncertainty. They're the ones who learn to walk through it. Because on the other side of uncertainty exists something extraordinary. A version of yourself you've never met before. And that version of you already knows something your current self is still learning. You don't need to force everything. You don't need to chase everything. And you certainly don't need to control everything. Sometimes the greatest breakthroughs happen when you stop gripping life so tightly and allow yourself to become the person your future requires. The question is, are you brave enough to trust the transformation before you see the results? There is another sign that many people overlook, even though it appears right before a major shift in life. You begin losing interest in things that once felt important. At first, this can be unsettling. You look at goals that used to excite you and suddenly feel nothing. The approval you once chased no longer motivates you. The arguments you once engaged in seem meaningless. Even certain relationships begin to feel strangely distant. Most people become worried when this happens. They assume they are becoming lazy, unmotivated, or disconnected. But psychologically, something deeper may be taking place. When a person evolves internally, the mind naturally starts releasing attachments that belong to an older version of the self. The problem is that we often mistake familiarity for purpose. Just because something has been part of our lives for years doesn't mean it is meant to remain forever. Growth requires space. And sometimes life creates that space by removing your emotional attachment to things that are no longer aligned with your future. Think about how children outgrow toys. The toy itself doesn't change. The child changes. What once felt valuable no longer carries the same meaning. The same process happens throughout adulthood. A person who is preparing for a higher stage of life often feels disconnected from old ambitions because new ambitions are trying to emerge. But before they appear clearly, there is usually a period of emptiness. And that emptiness frightens people, because the human mind prefers certainty. Even painful certainty often feels safer than positive uncertainty. That's why many people stay in situations they know are unhealthy. At least they know what to expect. Transformation, however, asks something difficult from us. It asks us to leave familiar discomfort and step into unfamiliar possibility. And not everyone is willing to do that. But if you've been feeling detached from things that once controlled your attention, don't immediately assume something is wrong. Ask yourself a different question. What if your soul is making room for something greater? What if the things you're losing interest in are not being taken away? What if you've simply outgrown them? This brings us to another fascinating sign. You begin noticing patterns everywhere. Coincidences become more frequent. Certain messages seem to appear repeatedly. The same themes keep showing up in conversations, books, videos, and experiences. Now, this doesn't mean the universe is sending secret codes specifically designed for you, but it does reveal something important about the human psyche. When your attention changes, your awareness changes. And when awareness changes, reality appears different. Opportunities that were always present suddenly become visible. Lessons that were always available suddenly become clear. Connections that once seemed unrelated begin forming meaningful patterns. It's like adjusting the focus on a camera lens. The world itself doesn't change, your perception changes, and perception is one of the most powerful forces shaping human experience. This is why two people can live through the exact same situation and interpret it completely differently. One sees obstacles, the other sees opportunities. One sees rejection, the other sees redirection. One sees endings, the other sees beginnings. The event remains the same, the meaning changes, and meaning determines emotional experience. The moment you understand this, your life begins changing from the inside out. Because you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That single shift in perspective has transformed countless lives, because every challenge contains information, every disappointment contains a lesson, every ending contains a hidden invitation to grow. The people who discover this become nearly unstoppable, not because they avoid pain, but because they learn from it, and learning from pain leads to wisdom. Wisdom leads to confidence, and confidence leads to a level of freedom that most people never experience. Which brings us to another powerful sign that your life is preparing for a breakthrough. You become comfortable being misunderstood. This may sound strange. After all, most people desperately want to be understood. They want others to agree with their choices, support their decisions, validate their path. But genuine growth changes this need. You begin realizing that not everyone is meant to understand your journey. Some people only know the old version of you, and when you change, they continue interacting with the person you used to be, not because they're bad people, but because their image of you has not evolved. This creates tension. The more you grow, the more certain people may question you. They might call you different. They might accuse you of changing. They might even try convincing you to return to old habits, because your transformation forces them to confront their own lack of transformation. And that can make people uncomfortable. Yet something remarkable happens when you stop needing universal approval. Your energy becomes stronger. Your decisions become clearer. Your confidence becomes more authentic. Because confidence is not believing everyone will support you. Confidence is continuing forward even when they don't. Many of the greatest breakthroughs occur shortly after a person develops this mindset. Why? Because approval seeking often keeps people trapped. It causes them to sacrifice their truth in exchange for acceptance. And acceptance purchased at the cost of authenticity is always expensive. Eventually the bill comes due. The moment you stop paying that price, your life begins aligning in ways that previously seemed impossible. You stop living according to expectations and start living according to purpose. Now here's something even more interesting. Many people who are approaching a major life upgrade experience intense emotional triggers before it happens. Old wounds suddenly resurface. Past memories become vivid. Unexpected emotions emerge. Again, this can feel alarming, but psychologically it often represents a cleansing process. Imagine cleaning a room that hasn't been touched in years. Before the room becomes clean, dust fills the air. The temporary mess doesn't mean the cleaning is failing. It means the cleaning is working. The same principle applies internally. Before emotional healing reaches a deeper level, hidden material often rises to the surface. Pain that was ignored demands attention. Fears that were suppressed seek resolution. Patterns that operated unconsciously become visible. And visibility is powerful, because you cannot change what you refuse to see. But once something enters awareness, transformation becomes possible. This is why many people experience emotional intensity immediately before significant breakthroughs. The mind is preparing itself. The psyche is reorganizing itself. The old structure is dissolving. The new structure is being built. And although the process can feel uncomfortable, it serves a purpose. Think back to the most important periods of your life. Were they calm, or were they preceded by confusion, uncertainty, and emotional challenges? For most people, the answer is obvious. Growth often arrives disguised as chaos. Opportunity often arrives disguised as disruption. And transformation often arrives disguised as discomfort. The people who understand this stop running from difficult seasons. Instead, they become curious about them, because they know that every meaningful chapter begins before the results become visible. And perhaps that's exactly where you are right now. Perhaps the confusion isn't random. Perhaps the distance isn't permanent. Perhaps the emotional intensity isn't a setback. Perhaps you're standing in the middle of a process that is quietly reshaping your entire future. A future that will make sense only when you look back and realize that everything happening now was preparing you for what comes next. The question is not whether change is coming. Change is always coming. The real question is whether you're ready to become the person that change has been trying to create all along. There is a moment in every person's life that changes everything. Not because something dramatic happens overnight, not because luck suddenly appears, and not because the world finally decides to reward them. The real turning point begins much more quietly. It begins the moment a person stops waiting to feel ready. Most people spend years believing they need more confidence before taking action, more certainty before making a decision, more proof before trusting themselves. But there is a hidden psychological trap in that way of thinking. Confidence rarely comes first. Action comes first, then confidence follows. Think about it. No one learns to swim by waiting until they feel completely prepared. No one develops courage by avoiding situations that require courage. And no one discovers their true potential by remaining inside familiar boundaries. Growth requires movement, even imperfect movement, especially imperfect movement, because every step forward teaches the mind something powerful. It teaches the mind that uncertainty is survivable. And once the mind learns that lesson, fear begins losing its control. This is why people who eventually achieve extraordinary things often appear fearless. The truth is different. They simply became comfortable acting despite fear. And that distinction changes everything. Fear doesn't disappear. You become bigger than it. You stop asking, "What if I fail?" and begin asking, "What if this changes my life?" Suddenly, possibilities become more important than worries. Opportunities become louder than excuses. Progress becomes stronger than hesitation. And that's when life starts responding differently, because reality often mirrors the beliefs we repeatedly reinforce. A person who constantly expects rejection behaves differently than a person who expects growth. A person who believes nothing will work unconsciously searches for evidence supporting that belief. A person who believes improvement is possible unconsciously notices opportunities that others ignore. The external world matters, but the internal world often determines what we notice within it. This leads us to one of the most powerful realizations anyone can have. Your future is heavily influenced by the story you tell yourself every day. Most people underestimate this. They assume their thoughts are harmless, temporary, insignificant. But the mind listens to what it hears repeatedly. If you constantly tell yourself you're unlucky, your brain begins searching for proof. If you constantly tell yourself you're incapable, your brain begins collecting evidence. If you constantly tell yourself that life never works out for you, your perception starts filtering reality through that belief, and eventually, those beliefs begin shaping behavior. Behavior shapes results. Results reinforce beliefs, and the cycle continues. This is why changing your life often begins by changing the narrative inside your mind. Not through empty positivity, not through pretending problems don't exist, but through consciously choosing interpretations that empower rather than weaken you. For example, consider rejection. One person experiences rejection and concludes, "I wasn't good enough." Another experiences the same rejection and concludes, "That wasn't meant for me." Same event, different meaning, different future, because meaning influences identity, and identity influences destiny. The people who enter the best stages of their lives understand this at a deep level. They become extremely careful about the stories they repeat.